And as a testimony of their talents in this line, I beg leave to introduce it, first stating the incidents necessary for understanding it. In the spring of the year 1774, a robbery and murder were committed on an inhabitant of the frontiers of Virginia by two Indians of the Shawnee tribe. The neighboring whites, according to their custom, undertook to punish this outrage in a summary way. Colonel Creasap, a man infamous for the many murders he had committed on those much injured people, collected a party and proceeded down the Canhaway in quest of vengeance. Unfortunately, a canoe of women and children, with one man only, was seen coming from the opposite shore, unarmed and unsuspecting, and hostile attack from the whites. Creasap and his party concealed themselves on the bank of the river. And the moment the canoe reached the shore, singled out their objects, and at one fire killed every person in it. This happened to be the family of Logan, who had long been distinguished as a friend of the whites. This unworthy return provoked his vengeance. He accordingly signalized himself in the war which ensued. In the autumn of the same year, a decisive battle was fought at the mouth of the great Canhaway between the collected forces of the Shawnees, Mingos, and Delawares and a detachment of the Virginia militia. The Indians were defeated and sued for peace. Johnny Logan, Talgayeetah, however, disdained to be seen among the suppliants, but lest the sincerity of a treaty should be distrusted, from which so distinguished a chief absented himself, he sent by a messenger the following speech to be delivered to Lord Dunmore. It was Simon Girty and Simon Kenton that got this message. So this is Thomas Jefferson. This is where we get the speech from, because it was oral. It was oral. It was orally said, and then the person came back and said what was orally said. Simon Girty gave the message that Logan had told him. And then Jefferson is writing this message. And then also there was Greathouse. What happened to the Daniel Greathouse? And they didn't just kill 3 people. They killed like 10 to 20 people. It wasn't just like a mother and a father, but it was like his sister and his brother and his wife and his kids and his cousins. And it was like they killed his whole family. They killed like 5, 6 of his family, left him by himself. And here is, he lost the war. He goes on a warpath. Johnny Logan goes on a warpath in order to make good, right? Eye for an eye. You took away all my family, so then I get to burn a couple of your towns down, a few your... All right, so here's Johnny Logan, Talgayeetah, according to Thomas Jefferson. I appeal to any white man to say, if he entered Logan's cabin hungry, and he gave him not meat, if ever he came cold and naked, and he clothed him not. During the course of the last long and bloody war, Logan remained idle in his cabin, an advocate for peace. Such was my love for the whites that my countrymen pointed as they passed and said, Logan is the friend of white men. I had even thought to have lived with you, but for the injustices of one man. Colonel Creasap, the last spring in cold blood and unprovoked, murdered all the relations of Johnny Logan, not sparing even my women and children. There runs not a drop of my blood in the veins of any living creature. This called on me for revenge. I've salted and I've killed many. I have fully glutted my vengeance. For my country I rejoice at the beams of peace, but do not harbor a thought that mine is the joy of fear. Logan never felt fear. He will not turn on his heel to save his life. Who is there to mourn for Logan? Not one. Not one. Before we condemn the Indians, end of speech. Before we condemn the Indians of this continent as wanton genius, we must consider that letters have not yet been introduced among them. Were we to compare them in their present state with the Europeans north of the Alps, when the Roman arms and arts first crossed those mountains, the comparison would be unequal. Because at that time, those parts of Europe were swarming with numbers, because numbers produce emulation and multiply the chances of improvement, and one improvement begets another. Yet I may safely ask, how many good poets, how many able mathematicians, how many great inventors in arts or sciences had Europe north of the Alps then produced? and it was 16 centuries after this before a Newton could be formed. I do not mean to deny that there are varieties in the race of man, distinguished by their powers both of body and mind. I believe there are, as I see to be the case in the races of other animals. I only mean to suggest a doubt whether the bulk and faculties of animals depend on the side of the Atlantic on which their food happens to grow, or which furnishes the elements of which they are compounded, whether nature has enlisted herself as a cis or transatlantic partisan. I am induced to suspect there has been more eloquence than sound reasoning displayed in support of this theory, that it is one of those cases where the judgment has been seduced by a glowing pen, and whilst I render every tribute of honor and esteem to the celebrated zoologist, who has added and is still adding so many precious things to the treasures of science, I must doubt whether in this instance he has not cherished error also, by lending her for a moment his vivid imagination and bewitching language. Then he mentions Franklin, Rittenhouse, and Racine, Voltaire, Homer, Virgil, Abbe Raynal, and Abbe Raynal.